So it'd be pretty cool. I know this is gonna be Tiffany's first time doing this on Restream. Tiffany, can you see the stuff on the top left, like the live, the timer, and all that kind of stuff on the top
Yeah.
left? Cool.
So I
Okay.
went full screen. I can see the little orange and timer on the left. And then on
Okay.
the right-hand side is a panel so people can leave comments, I'm
Mhm.
presuming.
And it will actually aggregate all the comments we get from Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. So very helpful and handy.
Cool.
But anyway, yeah, I guess we can talk about like how this got started. We've been wanting to talk about this, especially me and you, Tiffany, about just jumping on a live stream and just chatting about different topics. Kevin.
Dang! We have...
That's an inside joke from Kevin, CPR certification. Anyways, what's up, Kevin? Thanks for tuning in. Yeah, Tiffany and I, we've been just wanting to jump on a live stream and just chat about different topics, especially around dating. We might get into a little bit of that today. But yeah, finally happening, I think, after a year or so. So I'm excited for this. Hope everyone else is too. But yeah, we were just chatting about engagement rings. And I know both Tiffany and I are house hunting. So why don't we do something more juicy and start off with engagement rings? Very short.
Okay.
And this came about where I was talking to some of my family members this past weekend. And the conversation was about whether or not we should be buying diamond engagement rings. Like, is that expected? And it was interesting. I know Tiffany has different thoughts where a lot of my family and friends at the wedding were more traditional, where it's like, must be a diamond ring, must be a certain price point, because those are the things that make them happy. And probably also what social norms has dictated. So what do you think, Tiffany?
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I think, first of all, the couple, I don't want to say man and woman, but the couple should have a conversation about what the other person prefers, right? Because let's say, you're of the mindset, oh, I'm going to get her this beautiful diamond ring because it would mean a lot coming from me. And that's what I was taught growing up. And she is, for whatever reason, adamantly against diamonds. That would not turn out very well, right? Kind of something that kind of came up and kind of prompted the house hunting conversation too. It's like you think about some of the pricing around, real diamonds at whatever carat level. Might be by buying a diamond that's like 15K. 15K, you could have a new kitchen. Like, I'd much rather have a new kitchen than have a 15K sparkly thing on my finger.
I mean, I think it's logical to think that, but social norms would dictate, or the more traditional approach is that you want the ring. Like, yes, you can have that, but actually you can have both in the old days, right? You can have both the ring and a new kitchen. So why would you settle for just a new kitchen?
I don't know. Could you have both for people that rich back then?
I mean, I guess like there's a lot of inflation on rings too. But I mean, I think that's the mindset. The mindset would be that you could have both. But what I was going to say for my views is I'm very traditional in that sense. I think that I would expect to get a diamond engagement ring, but more often than not, talking, especially you and some of the other SAV girls, is like, why? When there's more practical things to spend your money on, like a new kitchen or a down payment for a house. And besides, I think a lot of people bring up the scam. Like they say diamond rings are like a scam from De Beers and stuff like that. I hear about that.
Yeah, there's the whole marketing piece around it, right? Where back then diamonds weren't worth that much, but then a company decided that they were going to try to sell a bunch of them, and so everybody bought into it. And now, right, like diamonds a girl's best friend. It's like ice this, ice that. That's so built into our culture here. I'm so distracted by these comments.
Don't want to support those children.
And then part of it too is I've always wanted to be different. So I personally, I don't think I ever really wanted a diamond. And if I were asked that question, I would much appreciate an emerald or like a sapphire, which is, still a precious gem. I want a big one, I don't want a little one, but
Yeah. That's
Yeah,
fair. Yeah, I don't know. I remember someone saying there was like a documentary or something about it too.
I'm
Like,
sure.
oh,
I don't know the details there. Are you asking this question as you're going on dates? Like, what's your opinion on engagement rings?
oh no, no. I guess like that's another point that usually comes up. Like more often than not, dating in the last 2, 3 years, what I find is that the majority of women that I date uh, typically don't want diamond engagement rings. They rather spend it on something more practical, maybe even towards a honeymoon, but not an engagement ring.
Ooh.
Uh, they typically don't want a whole wedding ceremony because it's pretty expensive. The average cost is like 30, 40 grand in the US, and many of my friends have more expensive ones. So they typically don't want a wedding, just want to get eloped. And then three is typically women don't want to have kids, which are very, very common. Is bigger always better? I feel like this is good.
He's just trolling us.
Yeah.
Not appreciated.
Yeah.
FYI. Yeah, I don't know. I think it depends, right? We're also like, I would say a little bit more mature than mature in terms of age. I don't know, in terms of maturity level. I hope that
Yeah.
everyone can keep their little inner child inside of them. But in terms of like maturity and age, maybe you've had a couple different relationships and your priorities are a little bit different when you're dating. And I think the people who are, I don't want to say left over, but the people who currently aren't married right now are maybe not the more traditional ones, right? Because if they were, they would have probably gotten married sooner
Mm.
and had the kids sooner and done all of those traditional things. I just but I just came from my cousin's wedding a couple weekends ago, and it was beautiful. It was spectacular. Then the latest thing I've seen is like the dance floor with their names and their like wedding date on the floor. It
Wow.
was very extravagant, and we all had a really great time. Everybody looked really nice. I'm sure there were great photos that came from it, but I can't even begin to imagine how much that costs, like realistically speaking. It was like open bar. There was like, really nice hors d'oeuvres to start. The dinner was really great, with some really expensive proteins and things like that. So I'm just like, yeah, I'm sure it costs a lot.
To be fair, I don't really know how I feel about the whole situation with weddings because, like, I feel like I was raised to have like an extravagant wedding, and sometimes I feel like it wouldn't be for me anyways. I think it'd be for like your family and friends, especially your family. They want to be there,
Mm.
um, and I feel like I would want something large, but
What
that's
about
feel pressured to want something large. I don't know. What were you say?
what about like the Chinese banquets? Those can be large and more cost effective than, your traditional Western wedding where you're paying per plate.
Yeah, yeah. I know a couple of my friends that had Chinese weddings actually made money on the wedding.
That's what I'm saying. Yo, I used to work at a Chinese restaurant and they would sometimes host weddings too. So, sorry to like interrupt you. Basically, a table would cost like $500, $600, right? For how many ever courses. And let's say you invite 10 adults to that table. Each person gives you at least $100.
Mhm.
You're making money from that.
Yeah, but I think in a lot of folks' minds, and especially in my mind, is like especially Asian people, they're very judgmental in the cases. So I know a lot of people that had extravagant weddings, or a lot of people that had cheap weddings, and in both occasions, the Asian parents or family would be like, "Hey, look, this is so cheap. They got a buffet. What's wrong?" Or they're like, "Wow, look at this. They got lobster. They
Yeah,
got
yeah, yeah.
food." They just talk a lot, and then especially if you're on the cheap side, you get judged hard, right? That's my experience. Is like Asian families would judge you hard and say,
Yeah,
why
I
would
feel
you not
that.
have lobster? Why would you not have
I
steak? Like,
feel
what's
that.
wrong with you? You know?
I feel that. I think it's also just, how much of an appetite do you have for that judgment? Because at
Mm.
the end of the day, they judge you until the next bad cheap wedding comes along, right? So you just got to deal with it forever, however long that is. And especially with COVID, people having smaller weddings these days, I'm also just seeing, um, we're also just seeing the typical wedding kind of be more acceptable, that it's, different than your big traditional bash. You're seeing different ways that people are able to have weddings, and they can still be fun.
That's fair.
So, yeah.
And this spiraled into a little bit more of the discussion, but let's chat about house hunting. So you're looking for a house, and I'm looking for a house.
Yeah. What's been going on your side? I haven't been able to catch up with you on like what you've seen or what you like, or you mentioned some of the new builds, right? Recently. Is that what you were mentioning today?
Yeah, there. So I've been looking. My mind's all over the place. I feel like everything I say contradicts with what I want in so many different ways. I'll give you a couple examples. So I've lived in primarily suburban places for most of my life, and it's not often I get an opportunity to live in the city. So I've only been in the city in DC for like 2 years now. So I want something in the city, and I want to continue enjoying city life before you move to the suburban areas. That's what I want. But it's expensive in the city. So that's one thing. The second thing is I am conflicted with one bedroom or more because I want a house hack. I want to have someone pay for my mortgage basically. And if you house hack, which is having roommates, you can basically have them pay for your mortgage. You do that for a year, then you go off and live in another property, and you basically have your entire mortgage covered. So someone's paying for your equity, and you can basically live for free. So I'm like conflicted with should I do that because I like my privacy. It makes sense financially to house hack. So there's that thing. And so that's why I was talking to you about the new build today. Outside of the city, in places like in Maryland, more so in the further out parts in Durwood between Rockville and Gaithersburg, the same property I can buy in DC is like 5 times or 4 times as large in Maryland, and the same price, more beds. So a lot of the properties were 3 bedroom, 3 baths, 1,500 to 2,000 square foot. And I'm like, should I do that? Which would be more financially responsible and give up living in the city? I don't know. Anyways, those are like just the rambling of thoughts. What do you think?
No, my question to you is, are you planning to house hack outside the city too? Like if you were to buy the larger property?
Yeah, I will look for 2 roommates potentially, and I might even Airbnb.
I was looking into the like rental market basically, because I would like to be able to do that too, right? Like I'm not looking at 1 bedrooms. I'm looking at 2 bedrooms. Specifically, actually, I'm looking at single family homes, which even have more bedrooms. And if you go into like the Maryland side, there are some properties that are set up to have like 2 separate households. Like they have, 2 kitchens, 2 bathrooms on different levels, and they have like the separate entrances too. But I always thought it was harder to rent to people if you're not in the city. So I did some like researching in that, and I don't think there will be a problem because at least the one article I read, housing prices are continuing to soar. So like you need more money to buy a home. And unfortunately, some people just don't have the money. So they're going to have to keep renting, even though rent prices are also increasing. So it kind of feels like a catch-22, like you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. But definitely think buying a home is the most financially sound option for me. And there will be people that will want to live out in the suburbs, right? And maybe their work is out there, or maybe they have kids that want to go, that want to be at the good schools that are not in the city. Not to say that city schools are bad, but just to have more space, and it's safer too. I was reading about some things to consider, like being a landlord, even like what things would be helpful to entice people to rent your property. And it actually was really interesting because it was focusing not so much on the physical things, but it was focusing on people's emotions. Like people want to feel safe, they want to feel secure, they want to feel like they're in a trusted environment, and that's what's going to promote them to be good renters because they'll take care of your property and hopefully they'll stay a long time. And from my own renting experience, that totally makes sense because when I rented from like local landlords, I felt much more cared for than in this like large luxury apartment building that I'm living in that's like 20 something floors, because I'm just a number to them. Like they can get other people in and out. But when I was living in a local home, actually up in Massachusetts, the landlord lived on the first floor and I was on his third floor. And I felt much more like taken care of there. And I wasn't, subject to all of the like corporate type rules that, one of these luxury buildings might have. And to be quite frank, I feel like I'm trying to get the most out of my living situation here because they're charging me so much. And I know it's a corporation, so like I don't mind, quote unquote, screwing over the corporate, not screwing over, but just, I don't know. It's like a corporation versus a person, So
I guess it depends on what you're looking for. I know that I have a friend here that I don't know if you've met yet, Katie. I know that
no.
she likes the smaller place feel. I like a bit of both. Like sometimes it's great to have that landlord that's also living there. You feel more taken care of. But on the flip side, because I'm more introverted, usually I like to just like be left alone. So the corporate situation where like they don't really interact with you is like great because I'm like I don't want to talk to anyone. But Kevin just mentioned something here is like, have you talked to your parents about weddings in your 30s? Have their beliefs changed over the years? What do you think?
I was going to pitch that to you first because I am not talking to my parents about weddings.
Oh, gotcha.
My parents didn't have like a big wedding.
How
I don't know.
big is
I don't,
what?
I don't know. Like, I don't think they even did like the Chinese style banquet. Like.
Do you know why?
Well, my parents were not living in the same area. Like my dad was here in the US and my mom was in China. So yeah, they just didn't really do anything. As far as I know, maybe I should ask them.
Yeah, I feel like this can go into like a whole nother conversation about how our parents' beliefs changed over time. I can tell you for certain, to Kevin's question, is that my parents' beliefs in dating in general has changed a lot over time.
Ooh,
Very
like
different. More, I feel like, especially in Asian cultures or maybe just like in ethnic cultures in general, they want you to, if you're Chinese, they want you to be with a Chinese person, or let alone, and I should have said that the other way around. If you're Chinese, they want you to be with an Asian person, but they're even more strict. They want you to be with a Chinese person. And if you were to ask my dad, he would be even more strict and say, not only Chinese, someone that speaks Cantonese. Like they're so strict in their beliefs on who they want you to be with. But that was probably 10 years ago. And over the years, as like they saw us as kids and cousins grow up and date, I think they've been very open to how we do things, and they understand that it's very different and they respect it. And my mom makes the comment all the time. They're like, they're different people now. It's a different generation. They, whatever they want to do, as long as they're happy. And I was like, oh, this is a very different person or different than I knew 10 years ago. Like, so they've changed. So I'm assuming for weddings, it's the same thing.
I think it's especially hard because they came here to America where there's a lot of different ethnic backgrounds in one place, right? Like if my parents and family stayed where they were born and grew up in Vietnam or China, there would only be around people that were just like them. And so it'd be a lot easier to, I don't know if it'd be easier, but if your dating pool is only like Chinese, then you'll probably end up with a Chinese person, right? Or your dating pool here is like anyone and everyone. Especially I don't meet too many Cantonese people, even people who speak Cantonese. So that seemed like an impossibility for me. I totally relate to that piece around growing up. My parents basically said, oh, we'd like you to be with someone who is Chinese, but their family was born in Vietnam, just like us. And I have met maybe a handful of people in my whole life, and they're not all men. And I'm, so it's like, what are the odds you're going to meet someone just like that and across the world?
I wonder why specifically that. Is it just
it's like stereotypes and judgments. It's like, oh, people from northern China are like this, or like Shanghainese people are like this, and I think it's like not because they're just out there to attack other people, but I think because they, weren't exposed to other kinds of people from different cultures, and so they hear these things, or maybe they have a bad interaction with one person who was of that ethnic background, and they just lump them all together.
Mhm.
So one of the great things that I feel like we have a chance here is to introduce like our families that I'll be like, I don't think my grandparents ever saw a Black person until they came to America. You know what I mean? So to be able to bridge that and introduce that, those cultures to my family, I think is one of the greatest things that were gifted to us here. And the more I like meet people and the more I travel, the more I find that we're all kind of the same. Like we group around food, community is important. Um, Stability and safety is important. Family is important from most people that I've met. And then, yeah, other than that, we just all look different and eat different types of foods.
God, bro. he's, he's trolling.
Kevin is taking this conversation all over the place. I'm not going to answer that specific question, but I did have a thought that came up that might be interesting, talking about house hacking. Okay, so you know how the divorce rate is kind of crazy, at least from my impression, right? And I think people
It's like over 50%.
People take marriage differently than they did back then, and there could be a couple different reasons. I don't know. Maybe they're not as religious. Maybe because women don't rely on men to financially take care of them as much anymore. Because women have more rights as women these days. I don't know, but I feel like buying a home with a partner with the divorce rate at the rate it is kind of risky. Like, you sign all this paperwork and then there's a possibility it might not work out between you guys. And then you have to like figure out how to divvy up the finances related to that. You look a little confused.
No, I just never thought about that. And I think there's like a million thoughts in my mind right now as you're thinking about that. The first thought is like, are you referring to the context of going into a house with someone that you aren't legally married with?
No. I would say you are married.
Okay, you are married. So you're
Yeah.
saying even if you're married and you are buying a property together, that's still very risky because of the rate of divorce.
Yeah. Just looking at pure numbers, right? And I'm wondering if people ever buy homes as friends. Let's say you have a longtime friend of like 15 years.
Right?
And
Wait, same sex? You talking about same sex or different sex?
Yeah, or different sex. I guess it doesn't really matter. But we're talking about house hacking with having like the ability to split the living spaces and have them be separate, right? Like that seems to me like a safer route to buy a home, because if you've been if you've been friends with somebody for 15 years, the chances of that friendship from dissolving, you know what I mean, is probably lower than someone you date and agree to get married to, depending how long you're dating, I guess. So I don't know. Do people ever do that?
Well, the question would be yes, in the sense from experience. I actually was going to do it. I feel like this conversation can take so many tangents. But I was going to say my friend Dennis and I were going to go half into a house because we saw how insane our friends were that owned a property. They would buy a property that was like 2, 3, or 4 bedrooms, and they would not only have their mortgage paid for, they would actually get cash flow on top of it. So we have a couple friends in Minnesota that have these houses they bought. They're like $300,000-$400,000, and their mortgage would be like $2,000. But because of all the people that are renting from them, they're getting like $4,000 to $5,000 in revenue. So it's like they not only pay for the mortgage, but they get extra spending money. So we're like, geez, this is crazy. So Dennis and I were looking at buying the biggest house ever. We were live together and just like Airbnb everything. So we thought about it.
So basically all you'd have to put down is a down payment.
It's actually that experience specifically that made me start saving for a house, because we just kind of spur of the moment thought about it. And we're like, yeah, it makes sense. Why don't we just go half, because then you can split down payment at least.
Yeah.
But I realized that I didn't have a lot of liquid savings. I was like, where am I going to come up with this money? And back then in Minnesota, the houses were cheap. They're usually on average probably like 200,000 compared to like where we live in DC. Like, it's insanely expensive. So now it's like I intentionally save towards a down payment for a house because it's not easy to just come up with that. What is Kevin saying?
Yeah, he was saying that people do this all the time with joint ventures, businesses, and real estate deals. I mean, that totally makes sense, but I guess I never thought about like actually just living in that space together. It'll be like the Friends episode, except like,
Yeah.
not in a New York apartment building, but like a separate townhome, like separate single home. I don't know. And it's probably nice too, right? Because you have a sort of sense of community. Like if you always have a house sitter, if you need someone to last minute babysit, maybe your friend might be able to help.
So
But that's true about the expectations Kevin
yeah,
mentioned.
I think it's really hard with expectations. So when it comes to business or anything that's more formal, I think it's a little risky when you do it with friends because, like, yes, it's to your original point about like doing it with friends might be safer than doing it with a partner that you know for a couple of years. The risk of doing business or even living with someone that's like a close friend is that if something goes wrong, you might lose that long-term friendship. Businesses or houses, because the house is a business. Like when Dennis and I were talking about it, it was like I don't remember if it was Dennis or myself. We thought about moving. Like one of us would be gone out of the state. So then, like, who's gonna clean up the house? Yes, you can get a property manager, but like if you're there, we might come into conversation like, "Hey, the property manager costs this much. You're already in the place. Can you go in and clean it or something?" Those kind of, like, to Kevin's point, those expectations I think are really important to discuss up front. Like what happens if
Yeah.
like who
Yeah.
cleans, things like that.
Yeah, I think in your case that definitely was more set up like a business, but I was thinking of it more so like you need a place to live, I need a place to live. Let's buy a home together.
I mean,
So
we were gonna get like this 7-bedroom place, fixer upper, and we were gonna Airbnb the couch, the living room. We are gonna like put beds everywhere. That's not legal, by the way, but we didn't know that at the time.
So you were basically trying to set up a frat house.
Yeah,
That's what it sounds like.
you can make so much money. And the thing about in Minnesota is like a lot of students come in for like short stints, rotate through the hospital for like a month or so, and they need short-term stays. Yeah.
Actually, the article I was reading about the rental market is saying that short-term stays are actually going down. People are going to be looking more at long-term stays because, you think about COVID basically turning a lot of things virtual. Maybe people might not need those short-term stays anymore if they can do some of these things virtual. So some thought.
Yeah, I think in short-term stay, speaking of which, when we talk about rental properties, I just started looking into if you can rent in Montgomery County specifically. And there's actually quite a bit of regulation on short-term rentals. Like not only do you have to get your license, but there's a certain amount of days you can rent per year. There's a certain number of like people you can have rent to. Like, there's so much regulation around short-term rentals in Montgomery County. And when Airbnb first came out, it was actually illegal in Montgomery County. So I was doing all this research. Like if you are thinking about investment properties, that there are regulations you should look into first before doing so.
Yeah, I don't think I'd want to do an Airbnb type rental just because of the potential turnover, and all the people, coming to that specific property. I'd probably look into more like long-term rentals to families and, things like that.
You sure? Because like think about this for a second. 30 days in a month, Airbnb per day, let's say it's $100 a night you charge. If you're looking at single family homes or townhouse, like it's a lot of space. So you can probably reasonably charge $100, maybe 50, whatever. But $100, let's say for average, $100 times 30 days is $3,000.
Are you really renting every single day? I
No.
really doubt it.
No, you aren't. But the potential is high. I would say Airbnb rental income is way higher than a long-term rental. Granted, the stability will not be there.
Long-term rentals, they're at least $2,000 if you're like looking at a couple bedrooms.
Sure.
So
I'm not.
I would say that makes up for it. And also, I've also been more about energy too. Like if I do Airbnb, I don't know what type of energy is coming through my place. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? So I'm trying to limit that movement there. So yeah,
Very
I think
fair.
there's a couple different ways you could do it.
Yeah, I have to say, like when I first came to DC, there was an Airbnb I stayed at. It was the best Airbnb I had. The host vetted the people that he was letting come into his house as very well. Like he knew very specifically the type of people he wanted, and he wanted to make sure everyone would get along. And by far, out of like the last couple of years of renting Airbnbs, every single person that came through that place, we became like family. We chatted on the phone. We were chatting in the living room. Like most people I know just stay in the rooms all the time, but we were always in the living room, hanging out, eating dinner together, cooking together. I think vetting people is really important for Airbnbs. Was Kevin's making a lot of comments here. What's he saying?
Yeah. Corporate housing, if you set it as corporate housing, you can bypass a lot of regulations. Of course, that makes sense.
Rental arbitrage. Kevin does his business things. What is it? It sounds like Kevin might be speaking from experience here. His comments about if you can't have those conversations, it's probably best not to enter the arrangement.
Yeah. I think it's all about relationships, right? Like I would expect that I could have those conversations with my romantic partner too. When we buy a home together, hopefully. So
Maybe on one last topic is going back to your original comments about getting a place with a married partner. So, with your comments stated, would you be against getting a place? Actually, how should I phrase the question? I'm assuming you're not against buying a house together with your husband.
no.
Yeah. I guess the main takeaway in my mind from that is like it's very scary that in this day and age that if you're married, you would have those kind of reservations because I don't know, the last generation, like in their mind, marriage is forever. You don't typically think of potentially not working out. And in this day and age, even in marriage, that people would, be like, oh, there's always divorce. I feel like that's very common nowadays. And to be fair, you should be thinking about that because divorce rates are like over 50%. But it's just it sucks that it has to be like that.
Well, here's my perspective, right? I feel like I can only control myself. So I don't know what's going to happen, to my partner or not that something's going to happen to my partner, but I don't know how my partner's going to feel in X number of years, right? You can only control your own thoughts. And for me, I would go into marriage as a forever thing. And I would try to work out any difficulties. But what if some difficulties are just not workoutable at some point because of drastic change, in yourself or your partner? You're laughing at Kevin's comments.
No, I was actually thinking about
So
something
distracted.
as you're
But
thinking
like,
about. Go ahead.
yeah, people change, and as a planner, I feel like I have to be prepared for all the possible things that could happen in the future. So I'm not saying I'm going into marriage with the idea of divorce, but it is possible. And like you said, it's a very high statistic these days. But I do think though that people who get married when they're a little more settled in who they are, and the people who are a little bit older maybe have a less chance of divorce. I'd be curious to see what the statistics are for, when people got married at what age. Like, I wonder if older people don't have, people who got married older don't have such a high divorce rate because they're more settled in who they are and what they want.
I feel like I vaguely remember seeing statistics about that. Like the younger demographics, if you get married at an earlier age, the chances of divorce is a lot higher than people who got married later. But with that even being said, like, I wonder if the best way, I think we had a conversation about this on SAV before about having a prenup. And the prenup is important. Like in this day and age, if divorces are 50% and higher, then having a conversation legally via a prenup about how you would handle split of assets like a house would be very important, so to not want to kill someone else. Like if you go into a divorce and I don't know, someone put more down payment towards the house or whatever the case is,
Mm,
if you come up with it like what Kevin was saying, you have expectations of how you plan to divvy up the house before all this occurs, will probably prevent a lot of headache and stress because you guys know what you would do if you do have a house together.
mhm.
Like pre-agreed in your happiest times. You know, like it's
Yeah.
agreed we both made. So I think that would be one way to circumvent the stress. And what is Kevin talking about friends with benefits?
I don't know. I feel like we should have just invited Kevin onto this since he's like engaging with us anyway.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Is Kevin still on? Where's Kevin?
No, it's all good. Been chatting for about half an hour here.
Yeah. We should do more of this. I feel like folks should let us know. Like folks who are either watching the live stream or in the recording, let us know if you like these kind of happy hour sessions, because it's just kind of these are the conversations we have in our chat all the time. And it'll blow up to like a couple hundred messages on some days.
All right. So when we meet your girl, we can let her know that she can expect a diamond ring. Is that the conclusion of this?
Well, the thing is, like, I think we were talking about it before. I don't know if we mentioned that first, but it'll come down to what the girl wants, right? You know, some girls want certain things. So let's say the girl didn't want a ring, then cool, no ring.
I know, but then you don't get to share, your appreciation, because you said it means a lot for you to be able to give a girl, the diamond ring of her dreams. Maybe like, I don't know, it would be best to connect with someone that also appreciates that. I mean, that's not a deal breaker, I would say. I feel like there are other deal breaker things. But yeah.
Yeah. One last question before you go is like, what would you expect the cost of the ring to be in today's standards?
I don't know that I have a number in mind.
No?
I just
Like,
want a shiny emerald cut emerald. I don't know how much that costs.
If you had a friend that just got engaged and you didn't even see the ring, how much would you think on that ring would have cost?
Oh, on average, I would probably say 15K. But that's like that's expensive. Like,
it's really expensive. Because 15K, what is that? If we use the typical benchmark of like 3 months salary, right? So what does that even come out to? I can't do math right now.
I mean, I guess that makes sense because I don't know, you're talking like different salary bands here. Like within my salary band, 15K. Huh?
15K is $180,000 if you use like the 3 month rule. Oh no, not the 3 month rule.
That's not right.
That's not right.
You have to do times 4.
Yeah, that's right. 60,000. Damn. Why is my video frozen? I look like a dweeb. Do you see
but
my?
Yeah, you are frozen.
Yeah.
You're like.
Yeah.
But wait, you have to consider that's what you're doing is post-tax. It's like take-home pay, right? Because I don't know, are people using pre-tax
gross
dollar estimates?
Gross. I would have used gross. If you did gross, that's someone making $60,000.
Okay, but that's still more than 3 months if you're doing the 60K model. It would take them like a couple more months than that to have that in take-home pay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. 15,000. So on average, I would have expected somewhere in between. In talking to friends, on average, I would have expected like 5,000 to 6,000. that's just anecdotal from my friend's experience. That's how much
Mm.
the rings have typically cost.
I'm trying to
15K
flip
is
it
a
in my mind. Like, if I were the one gifting an engagement present, would I spend 15K on it? No. Yeah, I wouldn't. That's why I wouldn't want someone to spend that much on a ring for me, because I wouldn't do it myself. I think max would be like 10K, but that's only like if they know exactly what they want and that's how much it costs. You know what I mean?
super expensive. I mean, to each their own, right? But
I'm like, do I have anything in my possession that's worth 10K? My car, I guess.
yeah, I don't know. Probably car is the most expensive. So my camera's not coming back up, and might be a sign that
Must be time to go. Talking to
yeah.
myself. Well, I hope the audience found it. Kevin.
Mainly Kevin. Kevin's just like dominated the whole conversation. Yeah,
See,
well, fun.
15K is a lot.
Yeah.
But anyway, I hope the audience found these topics interesting. This is what happens in your 30s. You talk
Yeah.
about buying homes and engagement rings for fiancés we don't have,
Exactly.
but we got a plan for it, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Great.
Okay. Well, it was good chatting. Let us know in the comments if you guys like to hear more about this, and we'll see you guys.